This will be a recorded session that we'll post on the Aspire 2025 webpage. And you'll be able to review the question and answer portion there afterwards. But today you'll be mainly hearing from Mark Bolinger. He's our Director of Projects and Programs, and he's going to kick things off with an introduction to Aspire. So take it away, Mark.
Great. Thank you, Jackson, and hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So as Jackson mentioned, this is really your opportunity today to ask questions about the solicitation that we released back on August 26th. But I thought before we get into Q&A, I would kick things off with maybe about 20 minutes of presentation to augment and perhaps clarify some of the content that's in the RFP. And it also occurred to me that some of you may not know much about CPCNH or about community power in New Hampshire more broadly. So why don't we just start there really quickly? So community power came into being in New Hampshire back in 2019 when RSA 53E became law. And this involves the aggregation of electric customers by municipalities and counties. And 53E allows New Hampshire cities, towns, and counties to become the default electricity provider for an aggregation of their residents and businesses, and also to provide related services to that aggregation. So mechanically, it works much like the competitive electric supply market that you may be more familiar with. The supply portion of the bill is handled by the community power aggregation or whoever they've contracted with on their behalf. Delivery in the middle here is the exclusive domain of the utility distribution company. So they maintain the wires, and then there is the back end here. Communities receive those electrons, and are also potentially served by value-added services and programs. And so community power is really about the left side of this graph and the right side of this graph. And we operate in both of those realms. And this Aspire program is certainly applicable to both of those areas as well. CPCNH is a nonprofit joint powers agency that was set up to help communities form these community power aggregations, and also to supply them potentially with all requirements electricity service. In addition, there are other joint services that we offer, such as developing projects and programs together, helping to educate the public about issues surrounding electricity service in New Hampshire, and also providing advocacy before the PUC and the state legislature. We currently have, I believe, 68 municipal and county members located throughout New Hampshire. You can see them over here in the map. Those in blue are currently operating, meaning we are already serving them with full all requirements electricity service. Those in orange and green are still kind of waiting in the wings. They've committed to joining CPCNH but have not yet launched. And then those in the yellowish tannish shading here are able to well, they're part of county level aggregations and are able to opt into CPCNH electricity service on an opt-in rather than opt-out basis. Altogether, these communities represent about 40% of New Hampshire's population. We are currently serving about 190,000 electricity accounts, and our expected load in 2025 for the entire year is about 1.5 terawatt hours or 1,500 gigawatt hours. Aspire is a new program for us. It stands for Annual Solicitation Program to Increase Renewable Energy, and I thought I would just kind of break down the acronym here, although it's probably pretty self-evident. But by annual, the way we think of this is a way to build a kind of a steady pipeline of projects that can benefit our member CPAs going forward. And from your perspective, the developer perspective, we like to think of this as providing some assurance that there will be demand going forward. If you don't have a project ready for this year's solicitation, you can hopefully rest assured or have some confidence that we will be back next year at some point to issue another solicitation. The solicitation program is pretty self-evident, but it stands in contrast to the ad hoc way that we had previously received and reviewed proposals. So we're trying to introduce a little bit more structure to the process of evaluating competitive proposals. Increase refers to the fact that only new generation is allowed to participate in Aspire. And obviously, renewable energy, we are only soliciting renewable generation at this time. If you have storage that you'd like to couple with your project, that is totally fine with us. And hopefully down the road, we may be able to solicit standalone storage as well, but that's not the case with this initial solicitation. So this program has been in the works for some time now. We had hoped to release the first solicitation earlier this year, but we got held up for a variety of reasons. But given recent developments at the federal level, in particular with the budget reconciliation bill that greatly reduced the time frame for solar and wind tax credits, we felt that now is the time to release our first solicitation. I'll also mention that we've heard, at least anecdotally, that some of the interconnection queues in New Hampshire are starting to move. They've been notoriously backlogged for a while now, but we've heard from some developers that they are now being asked to make what can be difficult decisions to either put up a fair amount of money to pay for distribution system upgrades, or else see their projects fall by the wayside. At the same time, we have recently finished contracting with and also subscribing our first community solar project, which is a nearly 5 megawatt project that's expected to come online next summer. And so the confluence of these three events really made it seem like that this is really an opportune time to kind of jump in and at least test the waters and see if we can find any additional opportunities out there, while at the same time, perhaps providing some support to local generators that are trying to build projects in New Hampshire and throughout New England. So we are seeking proposals for 20-year, what we're calling Aspire contracts, from projects that can deliver up to 40,000 megawatt hours per year of new renewable generation and associated products. Based on typical capacity factors in New England, 40,000 megawatt hours per year will equate to around 20 megawatts of solar, or maybe 10 megawatts of wind, or perhaps 5 megawatts of high capacity factor, quote unquote, baseload renewables. This could all come from a single project. So if you have a 20 megawatt project that seems appropriate to offer into this solicitation, feel free. Or it could be multiple smaller projects. So, 4 or 5 megawatt projects, or 10 2 megawatt solar projects. We will also consider slices of larger projects. So if you have a 80 megawatt wind project, for example, but are willing to break off a 10 megawatt piece of that and sell it to us, we would certainly consider that as well. We would like the price that you propose to cover all of the products associated or generated by your project. So that includes energy, capacity, RECs, and so on. And we have tried to structure the contract to be as flexible as possible and to accommodate a variety of different project structures or entities, including registered generators, unregistered load reducers that group net meter, and finally, unregistered load reducers that can directly offset our wholesale load requirements. I will note that this last structure is not yet possible in New Hampshire. It is something that we are trying to change to make viable. And if we're able to do that, my guess is this would likely become our preferred structure. But for right now, given that we can't really do that, we expect that most unregistered load reducers will end up probably group net metering. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that would work through Aspire in just a minute. So here's the timeline. Today we are here, September 10th, at the informational webinar. So this is your opportunity to ask questions. Any lingering questions that don't get answered today, you still have another way of submitting those. You can email them to aspire@communitypowernh.gov. And if you get those questions in by September 17th, we will endeavor to answer them and post responses online in our Q&A log by September 19th. I will note that we did have a flurry of initial questions after issuing the RFP, and we have, I guess it was last Thursday or Friday, we posted our first update to the Q&A log. So if you haven't seen that yet, you can go to this website and take a look. The next deadline after September 19th is the final proposal submission deadline on the 26th. We have purposely made the application process fairly simple in the hopes that, well, for two reasons. One, to just kind of lower the bar to participation, but also if just given how simple it is, if you're able to apply early, please do. That'll give us more time to evaluate your proposal, come back to you with any questions that we have, and so on. And it'll help us to keep on our schedule. We are targeting notification to all proposals by November 7th. I will mention that that is aspirational. We are a community-governed organization, which means that we need to run approvals through various committees as well as our board of directors. And sometimes that takes longer than expected. So we're targeting notification by November 7th, but that may slip. I mentioned that the application process is simple. That is by design. We're really just seeking 2 pages of pretty basic information about your project. Plus, and this is important, we want to see an hourly generation profile for the project's first year. So in other words, we're looking for an 8760 rather than a 12 by 24. And we will use that profile to help evaluate your project. So please submit that. You can email that to us at that same email address in spreadsheet format. The application itself is attached to the end of the RFP, but that is in PDF format, and we recognize that that may be difficult to work with. So we've also posted a Word version, a separate Word version at the Aspire website if you prefer to go that route. The RFP mentions supplemental material. We only really require the 2-page application plus the 8760. But if there's something about your project that you feel we should know and that we did not ask about in the 2-page application, by all means, please feel free to submit additional information to let us know those pertinent facts. That said, we don't really want to get bogged down reading a bunch of kind of less relevant generic marketing material about your firms. And so I guess use your judgment in submitting supplemental material. I already mentioned the deadline is September 26th, but if you can, once again, please do apply earlier. Okay, so in terms of how we will think about your projects, I think net value will be probably the most important criteria that we will use. And we will define that as the estimated value of the project to CPCNH over the full contract term, less the offered price that you'll be proposing. And that value, again, will be based on the 8760 generation profile. So please make sure to include those. I will note that our members are price sensitive. And so that's why this particular criteria kind of rises to the top. Other things that we'll be looking at include, how far along your project is, how much experience you have as a developer, maybe some related projects that you've done. In terms of community-related things, if the project is in New Hampshire, is it located in a member community? If so, does the community support the project? And are there any community benefits you can talk about? So maybe this is an area where you can submit some supplemental material if you have it, because I don't think we really ask too much information about this in the 2-pager. Finally, if the project ends up being one that will likely be structured as group net metering, then a couple other considerations come into become relevant, including which utility territory is the project located in? Is the project below or above 1 megawatt, as that will determine what types of subscribers can subscribe to the project, and also how much administrative burden will we be asked to shoulder. And for this last one, I will say that we are willing to kind of take on as much of that burden as we need to, but we also recognize that by doing that, we're providing a value to the developer or the project owner It can be fairly costly and time intensive to manage one of these group net metering projects. And so if we are asked to take on more of that burden, we will hope to see more of a price concession in terms of a lowered price that you're willing to offer into the solicitation. And then finally, given that our members are price sensitive, we will certainly reserve the right to not proceed with any contracts in the event that the proposals that come in do not meet our basic requirements here. So just because we're issuing the solicitation does not guarantee that anything will actually come out of it. We obviously hope that we do see something come out of this, but that will depend on what comes in. Okay, so I thought I'd just spend maybe the last few minutes here talking about the different types of entities that we expect to respond to this solicitation. And as a preface to this, let me just note that this is the first time we're doing this, and we're admittedly kind of new to this. So we think we've thought about this a fair amount and think we have more or less covered the bases. But if any of you out there see some kind of opportunity that we are overlooking or some other structure that makes more sense, we are very willing to receive that feedback. So just keep that in mind as I go through this. In general, we are expecting probably two different types of projects to respond here. We've got registered generators or unregistered load reducers. The generators in general are going to be more than 5 megawatts. They can be sited anywhere in New England, and they participate in ISO New England markets. Generators can be broken down into settlement-only generators and model generators, and we get into that a little bit in the RFP. I'm not going to cover that here, but suffice it to say that for any registered generator, their product is considered to be sort of delivered to market via the ISO New England system. And as such, we end up valuing these projects by looking at their energy value, their capacity value, and their REC value. For unregistered load reducers, these are going to be below 5 megawatts, sited in New Hampshire, most likely. They don't participate in ISO New England markets, and really all they're doing is injecting their power into the local utility distribution system, the delivery point being the point of interconnection. And we value those projects a little bit differently. So here we're looking at avoided energy costs, grossed up a little bit because we're able to avoid line losses, avoided capacity costs. And here we actually get a more significant kicker of 1.3x or 1.4x due to the avoided capacity load obligation multiplier. And then avoided transmission as well, although at present we are not really capable of monetizing avoided transmission costs because transmission falls on the utility side of the bill, not the supply side of the bill. And then, of course, we got REC costs as well, our REC value there. As you probably recognize from comparing these two value equations, the load reducer value is likely going to exceed the generator value. But at present, CPCNH cannot currently realize the full value of load reducers due to how load settlement is conducted in New Hampshire. We're trying to address this and fix this, but until we do, we expect that any load reducer that's responding to this RFP will, at least initially, most likely be better off participating in the group net metering program, which can work in conjunction with Aspire, and I'll tell you how in just a minute or two here. As such, we've tried to make the Aspire contract flexible enough to accommodate both registered generators and unregistered load reducers, whether or not those load reducers are participating in group net metering. And I will talk a little bit more about that in just a second. So these are my last few slides here. I thought it might make sense to just wrap up with a couple of schematics to sort of better illustrate how group net metering in particular can work in conjunction with Aspire. So what I'm showing here is really just a standard group net metering arrangement independent of the Aspire program. So the way this works is the utility provides the net metering credit to the project. That flows to the group host, and the group host passes through some small percentage, maybe 5 to 10% of the net metering credit to group members in exchange for those group members pledging their load to the project. So that's kind of the basic structure. But over here on the left, there is kind of an ancillary benefit that I think probably a lot of people don't really think about, but we do, and it'll become obvious why in a second. So just by virtue of this project existing and injecting its energy and capacity into the distribution system, um, those products are accounted for by the utility as what's known as unaccounted for energy. So in fact, the utilities are not actually accounting for generation from these types of projects. Instead, the unaccounted for energy serves to reduce losses. And what that means is that any load serving entity operating in the region benefits from these projects via the reduced losses. And so I've illustrated that here in this kind of hypothetical two supplier situation by noting that CPCNH, which is one supplier, receives X% of the load reducer benefits or the reduced losses, and then Eversource receives the rest. They're the second supplier in this schematic, so they get 100% minus whatever we got. So when you look at this, it's pretty clear that CPCNH does not at all need to be involved in your standard group net metering arrangement. Developers are perfectly capable of doing this on their own. But that said, we do passively benefit from the existence of these projects via these load reducer benefits. So switching now to what this might look like, what group net metering might look like in conjunction with Aspire. Over on the left-hand top left corner here, this looks pretty much exactly the same. We've got the load reducer benefits flowing as I just described. One thing that's different is the RECs in this situation would flow to CPCNH rather than to the group host. On the net metering side, it looks much the same, at least to start. The utility pays the project, the net metering credit flowing to the host. But here's where it gets a little different. In this case, the group host would basically send the entirety of that credit to CPCNH in exchange for the 20-year Aspire contract price, which flows back to the project owner. Also, in this case, we would, if needed, take on a group administration, and we would pass through some percentage of that net metering credit to the group members. And so in this way, we feel like we can sort of add value to the process through in four different ways here. Most notably, we are swapping out what would otherwise be a variable net metering credit for the fixed Aspire contract price. And that Aspire contract is a 20-year contract, so it provides a longer runway than net metering in New Hampshire, which is currently only on the books through 2040. We're also willing to take on group formation and administration, which provides a benefit. And then finally, we're also taking the RECs, which frees up the project owner from having to market those as well. So we think we can add some value here, and we hope that you agree as well. If we are if we are successful in our sort of lobbying efforts to change how load settlement is conducted in New Hampshire, then we would propose to drop the group net metering part of any contract that we've already entered into and instead treat the project as a sort of a pure load reducer without the group net metering rider in effect. So if I kind of toggle back and forth between these two structures, they look very similar with the exception of, in the pure load reducer, we've dropped all group net metering aspects. So the project continues to inject its products into the distribution system. We get the RECs, we pay the Aspire contract price. And in this case, we're able to realize 100% of the load reducer benefits. And this is really the kind of the key enabler of this transformation of the structure from what I just showed you to what I'm showing you here. Once we can realize 100% of the benefits of load reduction, then we can greatly simplify this structure and realize more value. So this is the way we ultimately want to go. But for now, we're kind of forced to proxy that by kind of working within the confines of group net metering. So that is all I have. You can find everything you need to participate and respond at this website here. And if you have questions, please email them to this address, and we will do our best to respond by September 19th if the question has come in by September 17th. As I think we mentioned at the outset, we're also recording this webinar and we'll post it at this website, the Aspire website. And just a note, we will post both your question and our response so that everyone has access to that same information. So with that, let me stop talking here and maybe go back to Jackson and see if we have any questions that have been submitted.
Awesome. Thank you, Mark. I'm not seeing any questions immediately at this time. Doesn't look like anything's in the chat. Oh, there's one. Will the PowerPoint be included on the website as well with the recording?
Yes. Easy
Great.
first question.
Yes. Yeah, feel free to raise your hand or come off mute, folks, if you would prefer doing that.
Yeah, if we don't have questions, that's fine too. The goal here is really to provide the opportunity. Maybe we've explained everything, or maybe we've totally confused you, but
We'll give it another couple minutes, see if anyone has anything burning. Of course, as Mark mentioned, you can always follow up by email if you'd prefer to do that as well. But I mean, I think that was a pretty comprehensive overview, Mark. So hopefully folks found that effective.
yeah. And if you do follow up by email, again, just a kind of a warning that we will be posting your question as well as our response publicly for others to see as well. So if there's something, confidential in your question that you prefer to avoid disclosing, I guess mark it as such, and we'll do our best to keep that part private at least. Okay, I don't know.
Sorry, one more quick question.
Okay.
You initially stated that you guys will be contracting, what, 40,000 megawatt hours, so equivalent to about 20 megawatts AC. Will you guys be doing another solicitation next year potentially? Or is this just a one-time RFP?
Yeah, so the plan is this is supposed to be an annual program. That's what the A in Aspire stands for. So yes, we will ideally be doing another solicitation next year. That said, as I mentioned, at one point we are a community governed organization, which means that we would need to receive board approval to issue the next solicitation. So I can't guarantee it, but that is our intent.
Got it. Ballpark, do you know when exactly you guys might be bringing that back to the board?
My guess is that would depend to some extent on the reception that we get to this particular solicitation. If we feel like we could benefit or the developer community could benefit from a pretty quick re-release of the solicitation in early 26, maybe we would go that route. But it's a little hard to say. I think it's going to depend on what we see coming in, what is proposed to this solicitation, how much that fills up our plate versus not. So,
okay, got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
I'm not seeing any hands raised or anything else in the chat, so I guess we'll say final call for questions at this time. All right.
All right. Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for joining. We appreciate it and hope to see more communications from you in the near future.
Yep. Thanks everybody. And again, just email if you do have any questions, email them and we'll try to post them. And otherwise we hope to see some proposals prior to the 26th or on the 26th. So thanks everybody.